The man's name was Robert. He was sitting on a bench outside the WQED studios in Pittsburgh. It was a cold November morning in 1986. Robert was wearing 3 jackets, all of them torn. His shoes had holes in them. His beard was long and unkempt. He'd been sleeping on that bench for 2 weeks, and Fred Rogers walked right up to him and said, "Good morning. My name is Fred. Would you like to come inside? It's cold out here." Robert looked at Fred like he was crazy. "Inside? Inside where?" "Inside the studio. We're filming a television show, and I think you might be able to help us." Robert laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who'd heard every lie before. "Mister, I don't know who you are or what you want, but I don't have any money." "I don't have anything." "I don't want your money," Fred said gently. "I want your story. Would you be willing to share it?" Robert stared at this man in the cardigan. This man who was talking to him like he was a person, like he mattered. "Why?" Robert asked. "Because children need to understand the people who live on the streets are still people. They're not invisible. They're not problems to be solved. They're human beings with stories. And I think your story matters." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, I'll come inside. But I'm not promising anything." Fred smiled. "That's all I'm asking." What Robert didn't know was that Fred Rogers was about to put him on national television, on a children's show, to talk about homelessness. And what Fred Rogers didn't know was that this decision would cost him everything. Sponsors would walk away. Stations would refuse to air the episode. Parents would protest. Network executives would threaten to cancel the show. But Fred Rogers would look at Robert, a homeless man sitting on a bench, invisible to everyone else, and decide that some people are worth losing everything for. In 1986, homelessness in America was at crisis levels. Over 2 million people were living on the streets. Entire families were sleeping in cars, in shelters, under bridges. It was impossible to walk through any major city without seeing people sleeping on benches, asking for change, living in cardboard boxes. But in 1986, homelessness was also invisible, not because people couldn't see it, but because they chose not to see it. Society had decided that homeless people were a problem, a nuisance, an eyesore, something to be avoided, ignored, or removed. Cities passed laws making it illegal to sleep on park benches. Police would arrest people for loitering or vagrancy. Shelters were overcrowded and underfunded. And on television, homeless people didn't exist. They were never shown on family programming, never discussed on children's shows, never acknowledged as human beings with dignity, because homelessness made people uncomfortable. It raised questions about poverty, inequality, and societal failure that no one wanted to answer. So the entertainment industry pretended homeless people didn't exist. Every show did this. Every network followed this unspoken rule. Except Fred Rogers. Fred had been thinking about homelessness for years. He'd see people living on the streets during his commute to WQED. He'd see families waiting outside shelters. He'd see children, actual children, sleeping in cars with their parents. And Fred knew that children across America were seeing the same things. They were walking past homeless people on their way to school. They were seeing tents under overpasses. They were hearing their parents talk about those people with disgust or fear. And no one was explaining it to them. No one was helping them understand what they were seeing. Children were learning to look away, to pretend homeless people didn't exist, to see human beings as problems rather than people. And Fred Rogers couldn't let that continue. So in October 1986, Fred called a production meeting. "I want to do an episode about homelessness." The room went silent. His head writer, Hedda Sharapan, spoke first. "Fred, you can't do that." "Why not?" "Because it's too adult." Too political. Too controversial. Children's television doesn't talk about homelessness. Then maybe it should, Fred said calmly. Bob Trow, one of the show's actors, jumped in. Fred, think about what you're saying. You want to bring a homeless person onto a children's show? Parents will freak out. Sponsors will pull their funding. The network will never allow it. I'm not asking for permission, Fred said. I'm telling you what we're going to do. The production manager, a woman named Ellen Doherty, tried a different approach. Fred, I understand what you're trying to do, but this could destroy the show. Is it really worth the risk? Fred looked around the room, at people he'd worked with for years, people who cared about children. Yes, he said simply. It's worth the risk, because children are seeing homeless people every day, and they're learning to ignore them, to dehumanize them. And if we don't teach them differently, we're failing them. But Fred, how many of you have walked past a homeless person this week? Fred asked. Slowly, hands went up. Everyone in the room had. And how many of you made eye contact? Said hello? Acknowledged that person as a human being? The hands went down. Fred nodded. That's what we're teaching children. To look away. To pretend people don't exist. And I won't do it anymore. Fred Rogers left the studio that day with a mission. He was going to find someone experiencing homelessness. Someone willing to share their story on national television. He started at the bench, outside WQE. That's where he met Robert. Robert had been a construction worker. He'd had a wife, a daughter, a house. But then he'd been injured on the job. Couldn't work anymore. Lost his health insurance. Couldn't pay his medical bills. Lost his house. His wife left, taking their daughter with her, and Robert ended up on the streets. For 3 years, he'd been homeless. Sleeping on benches. In shelters when there was space. Under bridges when there wasn't. He was 47 years old. And he'd become invisible. People walk past me every day, Robert told Fred during their first conversation. Hundreds of people. Thousands. And not one of them looks at me. Not one of them sees me. I'm like a ghost. I see you, Fred said. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Why? Because you're a person. And people matter. All people. Fred invited Robert to appear on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Robert thought Fred was joking. You want me on a kid's show? Looking like this? Yes, I'm homeless. I'm dirty. I probably smell. Kids will be scared of me. Then we'll help them not be scared. We'll help them see you the way I see you. As a person with a story. Someone who matters. Robert shook his head. This is crazy. Maybe, Fred smiled. But will you do it? Robert looked at this man in the cardigan. This man who'd stopped and talked to him. Who'd listened to his story. Who treated him like a human being for the first time in 3 years. Okay, Robert said. I'll do it. When Fred told the network what he was planning, the response was immediate and furious. The network executive, a man named William Patterson, called Fred into his office. Fred, I need you to listen very carefully. You cannot put a homeless man on a children's television show. Do you understand? You cannot do this. Why not? Because it's inappropriate. It's disturbing. It's not what parents expect from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. What do parents expect? They expect you to teach children about kindness and imagination and, I don't know, tying shoes. Not about poverty and homelessness and societal failure. But children are seeing homeless people, Fred said. They're seeing them every day. And no one is helping them understand what they're seeing. So they're learning to ignore those people. To look away. Is that really what we want to teach them? Patterson sighed. Fred, I understand your intentions. But this is a business decision. If you do this episode, sponsors will pull their funding. Stations will refuse to air it. You could lose the show entirely. Then I'll lose the show. You're willing to risk everything for this?" "Yes." Patterson stared at Fred for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "Fred, I'm telling you officially, as a representative of PBS, if you make this episode, we will not support it. You'll be on your own. And if it fails, you'll take the blame. Is that what you want?" Fred stood up. "I want to help children understand that homeless people are human beings. If that cost me my show, then the show wasn't worth having." The sponsors were next. One by one, they called. And one by one, they delivered the same message. If Fred Rogers talks about homelessness on his show, we're pulling our funding. The biggest sponsor, a major toy company, was particularly aggressive. "We sell toys to families. Families with money. Families who don't want to think about poverty when they're watching TV with their kids. If Fred does this episode, we're out. And we'll make sure everyone knows why." WQED's development director came to Fred in a panic. "Fred, we're going to lose 40% of our funding. We can't survive that. You have to reconsider." "No, Fred, please. Be reasonable. Think about all the good work you've done, all the children you've helped. If the show gets canceled, you won't be able to help anyone. If I teach children to ignore homeless people, I'm not helping them anyway. That's not what this is about." "Yes, it is," Fred said calmly. "This is exactly what it's about. Do we teach children that some people matter and others don't? Or do we teach them that every human being has dignity? That's the choice. But the money is less important than the message." Fred filmed the episode in November 1986. He didn't bring Robert into the studio. Instead, Fred went to where Robert lived, the streets. The episode opened with Fred walking through downtown Pittsburgh. The camera followed him as he approached a man sleeping on a bench. Robert. Fred sat down on the bench next to him. "Hello, neighbor. Today I want to talk to you about something you might have seen in your community. Sometimes people don't have homes to live in. They might sleep on benches like this one, or in shelters, or under bridges. And sometimes, when we see people like this, we don't know what to think. We might feel scared, or sad, or confused. But I want you to know something very important. People who don't have homes are still people. They're not bad. They're not scary. They're human beings. Just like you and me. This is my friend Robert. Robert, would you like to say hello?" Robert, nervous and uncomfortable, nodded at the camera. "Hi." Fred smiled gently. Robert has been living on this bench for a while. He doesn't have a house right now, but he's still a person. He has a story, and his story matters. "Robert, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?" And Robert did. He told the camera, told millions of children across America, that he used to be a construction worker, that he had a daughter who he loved very much, that he'd been hurt and couldn't work anymore, that he'd lost everything. He didn't cry. He just spoke, honestly, simply. And Fred Rogers sat beside him, listening, treating him with the same dignity and respect he'd treat any guest. When Robert finished, Fred turned back to the camera. "Thank you for sharing your story, Robert. I'm glad I got to meet you. Now, neighbors, I want you to remember something. When you see someone living on the streets, they're not invisible. They're not problems. They're people. And people deserve kindness. People deserve respect. You don't have to be scared of homeless people. You don't have to look away. You can see them. You can smile at them. You can remember that they're human beings, just like you, because every person matters. Every single person." Asterisk. The episode ended. Fred sat on the bench for a long moment after the cameras stopped rolling. "Thank you, Robert," he said quietly. "No," Robert said, his voice breaking. "Thank you." For 3 years, I've been invisible. And you made me visible again. The backlash was immediate and severe. Before the episode even aired, word had spread about what Fred was planning. And the protests began. Conservative parent groups organized phone campaigns. Mr. Rogers is promoting homelessness to our children. Sponsors pulled their funding. 3 major companies withdrew their support within 48 hours. PBS. Stations across the country received letters demanding they refuse to air the episode. The network tried one last time to stop Fred. Fred, it's not too late. We can shelve this episode. We can say there were technical difficulties. We can move on and pretend this never happened. No, Fred, we're begging you. The show might not survive this. Then it won't survive. But I'm not shelving this episode. The homeless episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood aired on November 18th, 1986, and within 24 hours, everything changed. The phone lines at WQED and PBS stations across the country were flooded, but not with angry parents, with grateful ones. Thank you for showing my children that homeless people are human beings. My son has been scared of the homeless man on our street corner. After watching your show, he asked if we could bring him a sandwich. We did, and the man cried, "Thank you." My daughter saw a homeless woman yesterday and said, "Mommy, she's a person." Just like Mr. Rogers said, thank you for teaching her that. The letters came next. Thousands of them from teachers. I've been trying to explain homelessness to my students for years. You did it in 15 minutes. Thank you. From social workers, you gave dignity to people society has forgotten. Thank you. From homeless people themselves, someone finally saw us. Someone finally told the truth. Thank you. And from Robert, the man on the bench who wrote, "Dear Fred, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. For 3 years, I was nobody. I was invisible. And then you sat on my bench and talked to me like I was a person. Like I mattered. You changed my life." A social worker saw the episode and found me. She helped me get into housing. Helped me find a job. I start next week. I'm not invisible anymore. Thank you. The sponsors who had pulled their funding? Some came back. Some didn't. But new sponsors arrived. Smaller companies, nonprofits, organizations that believed in what Fred was doing. The show survived. Barely. But it survived. And Fred Rogers never regretted it. Years later, in 1998, Fred was asked about the homeless episode. Do you regret making it? Given how much it cost you. Fred looked at the interviewer and said something that defined his entire philosophy. I regret that it was controversial. I regret that acknowledging the humanity of homeless people was seen as radical. But I don't regret making the episode. Not for a second. Why? Because children were learning to see homeless people as invisible, as less than human. And if I had stayed silent, I would have been teaching them the same thing. I would have been saying with my silence that some people don't matter, and I could never say that. Because it's not true. Every person matters. Every person has dignity. And children deserve to learn that truth, even when it makes adults uncomfortable. The homeless episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was never nominated for any awards. It was controversial for years. Some PBS stations refused to air it for decades, but it changed lives. Robert got housing. He got a job. He reconnected with his daughter. And he spent the rest of his life volunteering at homeless shelters, telling his story, helping others. And millions of children learned something that society was trying to hide from them. Homeless people are people, not problems, not statistics, not invisible. People with stories, with dignity, with worth. In 2003, when Fred Rogers died, Robert attended the funeral. He was 64 years old by then. He had a home. He had a job. He had his daughter back in his life. A reporter asked him, "What did Fred Rogers mean to you?" Robert looked at the reporter and said, "Fred Rogers saw me when no one else did. I was sleeping on a bench. I was nobody. I was invisible. And he walked up to me and said, 'Good morning. My name is Fred.' He didn't see a homeless person. He saw a person. And when you've been invisible for years, when society has decided you don't matter and someone sees you, someone treats you like a human being, that changes everything. Fred Rogers didn't just put me on his show. He gave me my humanity back. He reminded me that I mattered. And then he told millions of children that I mattered too. That's not a TV host. That's not a celebrity. That's a prophet." The legacy of the homeless episode extends far beyond one man on one bench. It proved something Fred Rogers believed his entire life. Children can handle the truth. They can understand complexity. They can learn compassion, but only if adults are brave enough to teach them. Fred Rogers lost sponsors. He lost funding. He nearly lost his show. But he gained something more important. He helped a generation of children see homeless people as human beings. And some of those children grew up to become social workers, advocates, policymakers, people who dedicated their lives to helping the homeless. Because one man in a cardigan sat on a bench and said, "This is my friend Robert. He doesn't have a house right now, but he's still a person, and his story matters."